terrible officiating, terrible team owners, clinching resolutions and revelations, all that and more, because it is time for Sunday Night Blitz. Welcome to Sunday Night Blitz. He's Frank Schwab. I'm Jason Fitz. We're hanging out with you as we do every single Sunday. Frank, you know, we got a lot of football to get to, but first, my friend, it's New Year's Eve. So we can't kiss at midnight. We're not in the same room, and it's probably not HR compliant, but Happy New Year, my friend. I'm just glad we get to hang out and celebrate together. There are no streamers, but, you know, we're still celebrating together.
Absolutely celebrating. And they gave us enough to talk about this weekend, didn't they? What a crazy week. We say that every week. I know the NFL's kind of that way, but yes, Happy New Year, and boy, the NFL going out with a bang in 2023, at least as far as crazy headlines go.
I mean, look, I know we've got a bunch of games we're going to get to. We'll get to every game as we do every single weekend, and we'll highlight the specific games. But can we just start with a little bit of controversy? Because I think you and I have been squarely on the stop complaining about the officials. Yeah, they're bad. Sometimes it happens. Move on. But this weekend, there's actual consequence to it. Like the call that everybody's heard the reference to, you know, we have the video. It looks like players have reported the ref didn't hear it, whatever happened there, whatever that mistake is, it is now making an actual difference in the standings, because that play being taken away from the Lions all of a sudden changes the outcome of that game, which is now of consequence because the Eagles lost. Playoff seeding is changed because of an officiating error, which to me is the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard of from a multi-billion-dollar corporation like the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, the NFC East might change hands because of that. If now the Cowboys are in line to win the division, we'll get to the Eagles and their collapse later. But how does this happen? I mean, and, you know, after you've heard it all, you know, I'm writing it real time, right? We're writing about this for Yahoo Sports, and you're getting all this information. It just gets worse and worse with Dan Campbell saying, I told him about it before the game. I told him everything I needed to do, because for people who don't know, they probably do now after all this hullabaloo. But coaches will go to officials before the game and say, we have this trick play coming. Look at this. I've drawn it up for you. Is this okay? Just be ready for it so you don't call penalty on us. Dan Campbell said he did that. I don't have any reason to disbelieve him. So they told him this play is coming. And Taylor Decker, who's the player who caught the end of the catch in 2-point conversion but didn't count, he goes to the official like, Fitz, they're not talking about like, hey, what's your New Year's Eve plans? Like, there's only one reason for Taylor Decker to be going to the official at that point. Jared Goff, being the leader he is, I thought this was a really good moment for him. He points at Taylor Decker, is like, go to the official and report. Decker does what he's supposed to do. Somehow, some way, the referee doesn't register this. He doesn't see it or hear it. He says after the game, he just flat out, Decker didn't report. So it's like he forgot or something, unless he's just lying. And I doubt that too. It's just, I don't know how this happens. And I think that this is kind of the peak of, look, the officiating, something has to get better here. Somehow, some way, the NFL has to have a come to Jesus moment and say, this is just not up to our standard. How do we fix this? We're going to spend all off season just getting this a little bit better. It's never going to be perfect. It's officiating. We know that. But it can't be this bad either. This is, like you said, we don't want to talk about officiating. It's kind of boring and cliche and all that. But in this case, this was really an inexcusable mistake that's going to it could determine who wins the Super Bowl this year, really.
And I thought it was soft by the rules analyst that was on the broadcast to turn around and say it's up to the player. I think it's soft for anybody that's blaming the team. Let's be very clear here. To your point, I talked to Dean Blandino on Zero Blitz a couple of weeks ago. We had a long conversation. Go out, check it out. The podcast is still there. One of the things I asked him is, how do officials prepare for games? And Blandino's answer was they study film to know particular plays to make sure that they know what they need to be looking for, and they meet with coaches. Blandino talked about this very process. Dan Campbell referenced it. Rex Ryan on the ESPN pregame show referenced the fact that you actually draw it up for the officials so they know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And then the other part of it is, I've heard some people say, well, why did multiple players go to check in to report? Well, there's a simple answer to that as well. They don't have to report until the very last second. So by sending multiple players up, they're trying to confuse the defense on which person's reporting. Like, all of this is done flawlessly by the Lions. Let me be clear. The Lions didn't screw anything up. The officials did. And I don't care if the officials get docked by not getting to play a playoff game or officiate a playoff game. I don't care if the officials lose money. What I care about is that the officials just cost hundreds of people, coaches, players, the organization. Hundreds of people are going to lose money, lose status, lose opportunity because of a terrible call that absolutely can't happen.
Yeah, and I agree. I will say, I guess there's a little bit of, it's not always, it's like a car accident, right? It's never 100, 0. You always have a little bit of blame. Taylor Decker needs to make sure, and I don't know exactly what was said or how it was communicated or what, the official, what that interaction was like, but Decker has to make sure, but it's maybe like a 95-5. Like the referee he knew this was coming. Like you said, it's drawn up, and it's unfortunate we're even talking about this because that was a really fun game. It was a hard fought game between two really good teams. And what are we talking about? We're not talking about CeeDee Lamb going for 227 yards. We're not talking about Jared Goff leading a last minute drive to maybe win the game for them. And a great play call. The play was drawn up beautifully, right? That was an awesome play. You thought the Lions had won that game. A huge win for them. It would have been. Here we are talking about officiating instead. And that's the NFL's problem is that too often these mistakes that could probably be avoided end up overshadowing games.
The hardest part of this, because honestly, I've said several times, I don't know if you watched a lot of XFL. I happened to host a show at the time around the XFL for ESPN at the time. And so I was wildly familiar with Blandino and his work on it. One of the things that was really cool about the XFL is officials were mic'd up the whole way. So you heard everything. You heard the replay official. You heard literally everything. And Blandino was watching everything from one central office to correct any mistakes. I am a long believer that the NFL needs to put an eye in the sky. They need to have an extra official at every game that's just watching. But I don't know how that would have even fixed this situation, because unless you're listening to the microphone of the official to hear what somebody says to him, I mean, if he says he didn't hear it, there isn't even a fix for that. That's part of the problem. Like for all the conspiracy theories and everything else, like this is not a fixable problem if you can't put a system in place that stops what happened. And I don't think that there is a system in place for this particular error.
Yeah. And, something you said about, by officials being mic'd up, I don't know if you go to that extent, but I think some transparency would help. I mean, look, how it works is if there's a really, really controversial call in a game and you need an official explanation, there's a pool reporter who goes talks to that official, just one pool reporter. Yesterday was Calvin Watkins, a very, very good reporter for the Dallas Morning News. He asks 3 questions of the referee, and that's it. I mean, officials, I get it. You're not going to have a press conference after every game with every official. Like, that's hard to do, but maybe a little more to just, and I hate when everything comes back to sports betting, right? Like, oh, now that they're involved with sports betting, everything, that's kind of dumb because none of this is rigged. I don't think either of us would think that they wanted the Cowboys to win here over it was a mistake. That happens. But there is a lot of sports betting stuff, and there is a lot of people out there who do believe in these conspiracies, and having more transparency with the officials, whether it is they're mic'd up and we hear what happened, or more of a press conference situation in a situation like this, just some more openness from the officials to the public through the media, I think would help a little bit at least, but it doesn't. The key thing here is the officiating is just getting worse and worse, and it's overshadowing the league. I don't know how to fix it, Fitz. I really don't. I can't sit here and tell you. But I'm also not getting paid a lot by the people at Park Avenue to get this done. They got to figure out a committee almost like a competition committee to just say, we have an officiating committee now. What do we need? Do we need an eye in the sky? Do we need this? Do we need that? Because it's really been a big part of the season and not in a good way.
Before we move to one question about the game, I'll say one more thing to your point of transparency. In my mind, the NFL grades every official. We know that. You and I know that. Everybody knows that. We hear that. In fact, they rate officials on the types of calls they make, and teams are given a dossier essentially in advance of, hey, this upcoming crew calls a lot of holding, for example. They know that. If that information is going to teams, at some point, the only way we will ever trust officials is if those grades, those accuracy percentages essentially are released to the public. When they tell me every week, the officials that are on the game that I'm watching, I would love to know, hey, this is a B- crew with an average grade of whatever that calls this more often than that. At least then we'll know the process and know what to expect. We've learned as a society what a good completion percentage is, and it's not 100. We would learn what a good accuracy percentage is from officiating if they would actually start to make that information public. That being said, Dan Campbell goes for 2 over and over, like Charlie Brown with the football. I'm watching and I'm like, at some point, just kick the damn extra point, go to overtime. Did you have any problem with the aggressive go for 2 plan?
No, I had more problem with him passing out field goals earlier. Look, I even know as they were driving downfield, it's in my head, Campbell's going for 2. And I don't have a problem with that. I always say, if you're an underdog, especially on a road, and you have one play from the 2-yard line to win a game, go for that. Don't take this to overtime and try to win a coin flip and all that kind of stuff. one play for 2 yards to win, go do that. I have no problem, especially as the underdog there. Now, when they got backed up to the 7, I truly do believe at that point, Dan Campbell's so mad, he's not even thinking straight. Because I can't imagine a coach would be like, yeah, let's go for 2 from the 7-yard line. Your percentage is so low. They didn't need the 2, obviously. At that point, you kicked it. But then Parsons was offside. You get back to the 2-yard line. So I didn't have a problem with them going for that there either. Goff just missed the pass. But yeah, I think Campbell, I do really, really like him. I love the aggressiveness at times, but he does take it overboard. Whereas it's okay just to take a field goal here and there.
Also, I should remind everybody, in case they haven't seen the latest playoff standings, as of right now, the Dallas Cowboys, who are absolutely unbeatable at home, right? We all know that. The Dallas Cowboys, if the playoffs started today, would have the 2 seed. So for all of the, oh my God, what's going to happen with Dak and McCarthy? And are they going to be able to keep their jobs? And the sky is falling for the Cowboys. Right now, the sky is falling, and they've fallen up because they're suddenly looking at the 2 seed, which would give them home field advantage other than the 1. We all know that. It would give them home games in the playoffs in Dallas where they are absolutely unbeatable. So it's amazing how all of this changes the entire dynamic, not just of what we saw this weekend, but the entire playoffs. Because I'm telling you, I think you and I agree. Don't you feel a lot better about the Cowboys going as the 2 seed simply because they're at home?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. And then you can get some confidence if you win a game or 2. And as a 2 seed, you're playing a 7 seed, who's probably not going to be a very good team. It's probably going to be, whoever, pick a name out of the hat of that 7 seed race. You're probably winning that game. If you don't, then you're really going to hear about McCarthy and Dak and all that kind of stuff we hear about with the Cowboys. But absolutely season changer for the Cowboys. Not necessarily their win, but the Arizona Cardinals win was the season changer for the Cowboys.
Yeah, we'll get to the Cardinals in a little bit. But while we're talking about good teams, the what was supposed to be the game of the day, like, for Yahoo, if you guys haven't checked out the Yahoo Sports app, you should. I do these quick reaction videos around a bunch of big games. Do them all the time, like 2 minutes, get you everything you need to know. So today, as we were getting ready, my producer on that, Sid sends me a notice, like, just making sure you're good to go. We got Ravens, Dolphins, because Ravens, Dolphins is going to be the game of the day. Everybody's going to be watching it. Well, everybody watched like the first 10 minutes. 56-19. Baltimore didn't just beat the Dolphins. Baltimore embarrassed them. Baltimore reminded the world, in my mind, that they're the best team in the NFL right now. They reminded the world, in my mind, that they've got the MVP. And they reminded the world for the second straight week, bring on the best, and they will simply beat them. I mean, this wasn't just a win. This was an absolute throttling of Miami. It looked like Miami doesn't even belong in this conversation, and the Ravens are in a class of their own.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I mean, I think 49ers-Ravens would be an excellent rematch in the Super Bowl. But right now, the Ravens deserve the title as the best team in football. I mean, and you think back, like, they did the same thing to the Seahawks earlier this season. They did the same thing to the Lions earlier this season. Good football teams. The Dolphins are a good football team, and they got blasted in this game. I mean, the MVP race is over, obviously. I mean, Lamar won it, 321 yards, 5 touchdowns. It was just stunning. It was absolutely stunning to see this Ravens team just roll the Dolphins. I guess I'm going to ask you a simple question because I had this going through my head. Does this say more about the Ravens or the Dolphins? Because, I mean, this is not a good look for the Dolphins, who took on even more injuries today and all of a sudden are battling for the AFC East next week against Buffalo. It was not a good look for them either, as good of a look as it was for the Ravens.
It's a bad look for Miami. I will give you that, especially they lost Xavier Howard in the first half of that game, and they lose Bradley Chubb, carted off the field late in the game when they're getting blown out. So a lot of questions about that. That's a bad look for them, but I'll say this. I think this is a statement about how good and how balanced Baltimore is. Like, keep in mind, Lamar had more touchdowns than incompletions in this game. For what that's worth, he had more touchdowns than incompletions. A couple of those looked a little lucky, like sometimes better to be lucky than good. A couple of guys in the same spot still finds him. But Lamar threw the ball with such zip and accuracy. There was just this moment of like, how do you beat that? How do you beat that version of Lamar when he's able to run around and then also flick of the wrist, make the plays? Like the wheel route moment to Zay Flowers, where Zay just gets open and then, I mean, Lamar drops it on time. It was beautiful. And you look at it and say, it's that. When he's cooking on those cylinders, he could just absolutely beat anybody from anywhere. I don't know how you defend that version of Lamar. And now we're sitting here having to realize that this is a young quarterback that I think is about to win his second MVP. Like, that's but I know it's early in all of this, but that's the sort of stuff you say about Hall of Famers. Like Lamar at this point is doing the sort of thing that we see Hall of Fame quarterbacks do. And I no longer want to talk about the money. I don't want to hear about the contracts. I don't want to hear about any of that. All I'm looking at is the best quarterback in the NFL right now is Lamar Jackson.
The one thing that's going to keep him from the Hall of Fame, I can't even think of a multiple-time MVP who didn't make the Hall of Fame, but it would be the lack of a Super Bowl, right? Like, I mean, if they go one and done in the playoffs again, you're going to hear the same stuff about Lamar that we keep hearing, and I hate it because I just think it's a terribly small sample size. It could be fluky, whatever, but I don't see this team be a one and done, and I don't know who's really going into Baltimore and winning. Maybe the Bills, but the Ravens just, at some point, you just got to tip your cap and say this is the best team of football. And the biggest reason is Lamar Jackson. He's just that dude. Like he makes plays over and over again that just nobody else can make. And it's the NFL's the margins are very slim. And if you have a quarterback who makes 5 plays a game that nobody else can make, that's going to make you a 13-3 type of team like the Ravens are. I will say one thing too. A big factor for the Ravens. They lose Mark Andrews. Isaiah Likely comes in. We always said this kid's a pretty good player. Saw him play well in the preseason when he got his chances, but you're losing Mark Andrews. You lose one of the 3 best tight ends on the planet, right? This is huge for the Ravens offense. And Isaiah Likely has filled in so well. I know he only caught 2 passes today, but one was absolutely enormous. One-hand catch. He takes to end zone for a touchdown. It turned the game around. That, to me, was the turning point. I think Isaiah Likely, obviously Lamar, the defense, all that kind of stuff. Isaiah Likely has been one of the biggest keys to their season, being able to fill in for an absolutely elite tight end, and that offense hasn't lost a beat. I think that says a lot about the Ravens organization, the way they prepare, they draft, they develop. Everything about the Ravens right now is elite first class, and there's no question they can go win a Super Bowl.
And one thing I love about the way we approach the show and the way you write is we try to be somewhat measured in this. So I want to say, as a qualifier here, obviously the game's just ended. I haven't watched the all 22 yet to figure this out. Early in the game, the chunk plays for both sides were through the roof. I mean, both sides were just getting huge yardage. The interesting thing to me about Miami is that when it became clear that the Dolphins were going to have to go blow to blow and maintain that level of pace, they couldn't, right? Like the offense that is built to do that, when it was put into that shootout situation, I mean, I kept looking at it thinking, man, if this is going to be a 40-30 game, that favors the Dolphins in my mind. Like they can score from anywhere. And all of a sudden, this thing went from looking like that to just lopsided. That was what really surprised me, is that over the course of it, the Dolphins began to press. It couldn't get those big plays anymore, and they never stopped the Ravens from getting them. And without watching the tape, I don't have the answer to why right now, but I think that's a stunning development in this game.
No, and that kind of goes back to the question I asked you about who's said more about, because I think you got to at least acknowledge that this makes the Dolphins again look like front runners. Like, yeah, you could beat the heck out of the Commanders. Awesome. But when you play a really, really good team, you really get punched in the mouth. You don't punch back. I know they beat the Cowboys, but again, okay, that last play at home, good win, no doubt. I'm not trying to take it away from them, but it's not like you're like, whoa, here are the Dolphins. They got by a good team barely at home. You play another good team the next week of the Ravens, where you basically know we need to win this game, or the Bills are coming to town next week trying to take the AFC East title. And the Dolphins, like you said, like this game just got to be too much for them. The lights were a little too bright for them. And that's been a theme for them all season. If you're playing a 4-12 team, they're going to beat the heck out of them and put up 50 points, 70 against the Broncos early in the season. But you're not facing those teams in the playoffs. And it gives me a real question about where the Dolphins season's heading. The injuries are piling up. I think the Bills win next week, and I think the Dolphins are going to have to go on the road in the first round. I don't like anything about the Dolphins right now. It stinks for them because they had such a promising season.
In my mind, the entire AFC next week, every single fan, every single executive, every single player is going to be rooting for the Dolphins to win that football game. Because let me tell you, everybody like, hey, got to go to Miami, play in January. That's fine. If the Bills win that game and all of a sudden you got to go through Buffalo, that changes the entire dynamic of the playoff for teams like Cleveland and for teams like the Jags that are trying to make it, for teams like Indianapolis. Like going to Miami, you can survive that. Going to Buffalo, oh man, I don't think anybody wants anything to do with that.
Nope. I think the only team that can beat Buffalo is the Ravens. And I mean, I think it'd be a great AFC Championship game, and I'm rooting for it because I like good football. But yeah, I completely agree that if you're just choosing your opponent, right? Like you'd be like, we'll take the Dolphins 10 times out of 10. And that stinks for the Dolphins because they have had such a fun, good season, growth season. It looks so promising. And now it just seems to be, I don't want to say falling apart, but kind of, especially with the injuries.
Well, while everybody's out in the club and club in Miami celebrating New Year's, there's a little bit of panic. In Philly, there's full-blown panic. I mean, like, for anyone that's listening, not watching, you know the meme of Kermit the Frog going, ah! That's what's happening right now as I wave my hands above my head, and people that are listening have no idea what I'm doing. They are Kermit the Frogging all over Philadelphia this point. Because they lost to Arizona 35-31. That is not a misspeak from me for once, 35-31 in a game where Arizona they were who they've been much of this year. They played tough football. They put themselves in the game. And I thought, just like much of this year in the fourth quarter, they would melt away like ice cream and Philly would somehow get the win. And instead, my friend, the Cardinals drive down the field and they punched the ball down the Eagles' throats for the game-winning touchdown with about 25 seconds left. It was a statement way to get a statement win for the Cardinals, and it absolutely destroys the Eagles because it takes them all the way down to the 5 seed going into this playoff into the last weekend.
Man, I mean, where do you even start with this? I guess I'll start here. Like, usually when games like this happen, when you see, 3-win Cardinals go to the Eagles who win, you're like, oh, okay, the Eagles turned it over 5 times, and this bounce went against them, that bounce went against them. No, they got blasted in this game. The Cardinals had 449 yards, and the Eagles had 275. Like, the Cardinals put up 29 points in the second half. They completely outplayed the Eagles. Eagles had a 99-yard interception return for a touchdown and still lost at home to the then 3-12 Arizona Cardinals, now 4-12. This is just... Everybody's panicking, and we kind of make fun of some of these markets about like Philly. They would just like every loss is the end of the world, like Dallas, New York, whatever. This loss really does feel like the end of the world. This loss feels like everything that has gone wrong for them all season caught up to them exactly at the same time in the second half. The defense stunk. The defense has been bad all season. All of a sudden, the offense couldn't sustain anything to just keep the ball away from the Cardinals. I mean, they kept up points-wise, but they couldn't put the game away, and it's just a bad loss for the Eagles. It changes their entire season. Now, probably, unless Dallas trips up against Commanders next week, you got to go on the road first every round probably, unless maybe you get lucky in the NFC Championship game and like a 7 seed is waiting for you. This changes the entirety of the Eagles season where everything was in front of them just to win the NFC East. All you got to do is beat the Giants twice and beat the Cardinals. Shouldn't be that hard. But everything has been wrong about the Eagles. It came to bite them in the behind in the second half in this game.
As of right now, there is no reason to have any faith in the Philadelphia Eagles in my mind.
None.
Because going into this playoff run, it was going to be all about, well, guess what? They're going to be at home. Even though it hasn't gone well, they're going to get some home games. Going into Philly is an environment. Do we trust these other quarterbacks? Blah, 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 blah. You're right. Now we're putting Philly on the road, and we're also taking what is frankly just a bad defense. Philly's defense looked like trash.
Bad defense.
And there is this moment of, for all of the conversation about Shane Steichen leaving as an offensive coordinator, it really turned out to be Gannon, the coach that turned around to beat them, that was the bigger loss for them in this situation. They just haven't been able to figure out an answer to this. And when you let the Cardinals just dominate, this is the second time we've seen this year, where the Cardinals have dominated the line of scrimmage against a very good football team. Like you and I, we're old guys. Like I feel like I'm watching the old NFC East back in the day when like the Cardinals were a part of that division because they took it to the Cowboys and they take it to the Eagles in the same season. They're running the football down the throat of 2 teams that right now are in the top 5 in the NFC, and they gave both of them all they could handle. Like this is a statement to Jonathan Gannon getting the Cardinals to play well, but it's also a statement that the Eagles are broken. Defensively, the Eagles are flat out broken.
And even offensively, look, I thought this was a fascinating coaching decision that the Cardinals scored with about 5.5 minutes left. They do a surprise onside. I was like, who has, I guess you could do stuff like that when you're 3-12, but I was like, whoa, what? But Eagles recover and you're like, okay, that's the game. They got the ball at midfield, going to run out of clock or at least whatever they're going. They had 1 first down, went 14 yards to kick the field goal. And you just kind of knew at that point, like you can't trust the defense to get a stop. There's still 3 minutes to go in the game. That was kind of the moment of you get a surprise onside recovery midfield with 5.5 minutes to go in a game where you're winning and you can't close it out at that point. Like, man, like Eagles just, I don't know what could possibly change in the next couple of weeks to where the Eagles could be trusted to make any kind of a playoff run, or even maybe win a playoff game. Like, they're probably going to go play the Buccaneers in the first round. I think the Buccaneers could beat them. Why couldn't they? Like, the Eagles are just a bad football team right now, and I don't see what gets fixed in the next 2 weeks. It's going to magically turn it all around.
Which then puts them in the same category as a few teams we'll talk about today, where it's just it's a disappointment. It's there's no nice way around this. Like, when you have Jalen Hurts, when you have a young quarterback, you're supposed to be that you believe in, that you're proving as one of the guys in the league. Every year you got to make the most of it. And they lost an opportunity this year. They'll look back and say, man, they have too much talent on the offensive side of the ball and on the defensive side of the ball. Like, this should not have been this disaster. Like, the chess pieces did not suddenly get bad. It just seems like the person playing chess suddenly got bad, right? Like, there's a big difference there. And that lets the whole franchise down. It lets the organization down. It lets the fans down. Like, you can't have these sorts of years, cough Bengals, when you've got a quarterback, that you believe in, cough Bills, for much of the year. Like, you just, when you're growing like they've grown, this sort of a step back is inexcusable. And they're going to have to look in the mirror and figure out what they're going to do to change their coaching situation when it comes to coordinators for next season, in my mind. Yeah.
And one more thing before we move on from the Eagles. There's a lesson of, when people get upset about, talking about teams being lucky for close wins and point differential and, I don't care about the stats, nerd, we're winning games, we're 10-1. No, there were warning signs all season. I get the Eagles had a really, really good record, but the people who, you really look into this stuff and how they were winning games and how they're barely escaping the Commanders at home and stuff like that, the warning signs were there all season. It's just everything was covered up because they kept winning all these close games like the Bills, whatever. And now it just came back to bite them. And it's one of those things. Yeah, sometimes you can catch a great run the whole season and win every single close game like the Vikings last year or whatever. But usually it doesn't sustain. And now this is regression hitting the Eagles. And we're kind of seeing really that they're not a very good football team. And they probably played more to like an 8-8 level than 11-5. This is just, it's almost inexcusable at that roster how they could be this kind of mediocre and disappointing.
Yeah, this is overused as an analogy for me, but I always say, like, if you were playing Madden, if you just opened up, you pulled out the sticks, you're going to play Madden today, the Eagles would be one of the teams that you pick. So
you wouldn't let your opponent, like, you can't pick the Eagles, are too good. Like, pick the Packers, like, whatever.
And if you're doing this, then coaches are going to lose their job for everything that happened. Speaking of losing their jobs, hard to do for some people in some positions in the NFL, but as we break down the rest of the action, I'm not sure that there isn't an owner that deserves to have his team taken from him. And I don't say that lightly. All right, let's look at the Jags taking on Carolina. Jacksonville gets 26-0 win. There's some consequence to the NFL for everyone that doesn't remember. Carolina made a trade with the Bears when they got Bryce Young. So important here to note, as of today, it's official. The Chicago Bears own the number 1 pick in the draft next year, which will create some very interesting conversation that we will have when we break down the Bears game. Stick with us for that. But there's something even bigger in this. Jacksonville wins 26-0. David Tepper, the much maligned owner of the Carolina Panthers, was in his luxury suite after the game, and a Jags fan was talking his talk. Now, I understand that fans think they can say anything, anytime, anywhere, and it gets frustrating. You and I deal with that on social media every single day. But that being said, the video is now everywhere of David Tepper throwing his drink on the Jags fan. Let me be clear to David Tepper in the NFL. If that was a player, if that was a coach, if that was a GM, if that was anybody else that was an actual employee of the league, not family of, not friends of, actual employee of the league, they would face a punishment that is like the thunder of the gods. David Tepper deserves that same scrutiny. When you are an owner of an NFL team, in fact, you should be held to a higher standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you throw a drink on a fan, you shouldn't be allowed to step back into that stadium for a substantial amount of time. At the very least, the NFL should suspend him. But at what point does the NFL start to look at their good old boys network and start to ask, are the people that own these teams good representatives of our brand? Because the answer to that for David Tepper is clearly no. David Tepper is not representing his team, his league, his organization, his city. He's not even representing himself well. So for him to still be allowed in that stadium is a joke.
Yeah, real quick before I give my thoughts, what do you do? What's your punishment for him?
I suspend him for a year. I would make him sit out the rest of this season and all of next year. Suspend him for a year.
Hey, I mean, I agree in that owners need to be held to the higher standard. I mean, look, the NFL loves fining its players $20,000 for pointing an opponent when you've juked him on the way to the end zone. Josh Allen a couple weeks ago. He at least, this leads to be $1 million fine in my mind, and a suspension. I don't know if he'll year.
What do you fine a billionaire? That's the hard part about it.
That's the problem.
What kind of fine can we give David Tepper that's going to be any more than a cup of coffee to me and you? You know what I mean? Like, because I'm with you, and I feel like I know I step on this soapbox sometimes with owners. Like, you can't be fired from the NFL for being bad at your job. If you're a bad owner, you're just bad. Like, if you hire bad coaches, you just got to deal with it. You throw a drink on a fan? Like,
that's terrible.
What are we doing?
Yeah, I couldn't come up. I mean, we were talking about it, through our Slack channel at work, and I was like, I can't. I'm usually pretty good at like historical references. I couldn't come up with anything like this. Like, I just, what's the comp for this? And Al Toby, one of our editors, was like, well, Bud Adams flipped off the fans in Buffalo once. And I guess, like, but it's not the same as throwing a drink on somebody. Like, you can't do that. You are one of the 31 owners of the NFL, right? Like, you are the face of literally, you are the franchise. You own it. You can't do this. And it's got to come down really hard. I just feel bad for Panthers fans because they went from one terrible owner to another right away. Like, I mean, there's probably this hope after Jerry Richardson has to sell the team after all that controversy that, hey, this billionaire's coming in. He's going to be really aggressive. We're going to be good. And he's been terrible. And I've always said, like, David Tepper was basically a friendlier Daniel Snyder, right? Like, there was a ton of football stuff that was terrible, firing coaches all the time and going through quarterbacks every year. But he didn't seem like a terrible human being yet. And now this puts him in like, oh, yeah, you're not even good off the field. He threw a drink on another fan. Like, I will say, like, let's let the whole, like, who knows what that fan said to David Tepper, but there's nothing to really justify this. And yeah, I don't think any punishment that is too strong for this to tell other owners, look, maybe you could screw up your team and trade away draft picks when you shouldn't and draft busts at quarterback or whatever, but you can't do this, especially with fans. There needs to be a serious message sent.
If conduct detrimental to the team is going to be something that exists for players, how does conduct detrimental to the league not exist for owners? Because if Antonio Brown had taken his Gatorade from the sideline and chucked it in the face of a fan, what would his punishment have been? Right. And again, when you are an owner, you have to be held to a higher standard. That is I don't care what not even just with the NFL. Like, if you own Yahoo, you're going to be held to a higher standard than you and I do. If you own a McDonald's, you're going to be held to a higher standard than the people that work in it. That is what happens when you get the title of owner through all of this process. And to stoop to that level, man, it's unforgivable in my mind for David Tepper. There's nothing he can say or do that will change the fact that he has absolutely become unhinged. He's somebody the league can't trust to represent them, and he's somebody the team can't trust to represent them. And if I'm a player, the next time he looks at me and says, oh, man, well, you're always representing the Carolina Panthers, things like that owners say, I'd laugh in his face. He's a joke. He's a very successful man that has obviously become a joke. We'll move on. Did you have anything else from this game, by the way? As I'm
just real quick, big win for the Jaguars. Like, look, they went in this game without Trevor Lawrence, and I thought it was a smart move to say, we're not going anywhere in the playoffs with Trevor Lawrence just, limping around and his shoulder hanging down because he's got a sprained AC joint. I don't know how close Trevor really was to playing it. Maybe not that close, but I thought it was, even if he was close, sit him, because if Trevor in this state is not taking you anywhere, they kind of steal a win here. Defense rallies, plays really, really well. CJ Beathard was good enough, and it puts them in a position to clinch AFC South with a win next week against the Titans, and gives Trevor Lawrence another week to get better. So I thought this was a big win for the Jaguars.
You mentioned the Titans. Let's go to that game next. Houston destroys the Titans 26-3, which gives us the three-way tie in the AFC South. Everybody's 9-7 except for the Titans, and the wheels have officially fallen off for the Titans in every possible way. They just barely even look like a capable football team at this point. So obviously a bad one for them, but Houston gets Will Anderson Jr. back. They get CJ Stroud back, and Houston felt like they were the Houston we've seen for the majority of the season when they've had them. They look like a playoff team to me.
Yeah, I might have to take an L on something I said draft night. I liked the CJ Stroud pick, but I hated all that they gave up to move back up to get Will Anderson, right? Like, it was a vast overpay. There's no other way to put it. I said something akin to Will Anderson's going to have to be a Hall of Famer to justify this. And I'm not saying he's a Hall of Famer, but man, he's good. Like, he really took over the game from the defensive side of it. CJ Stroud he just picked up. I was a little worried about Stroud and just, you've been down for 2 weeks, had this bad concussion. Did he just pick up right where he left off? And if he didn't, does Puka Nacua steal the rookie of the year from him? But Stroud looked great in this game like he has all season. He's a really, really special player, a great talent. Houston's lucky to have him. And man, if you would have told me 9-10 months ago, whatever, that Houston was going to be going into week 18 with alive for the playoffs, it had been an unbelievable season. Kudos to everybody with the Texans. They've completely changed the look of the franchise in one season. It's pretty remarkable what they've done.
Yeah, they sit right now on the outside looking in with the 8th seed, but the same record as we've mentioned as the Jags and as the Colts. So going to be a tight one for them. And Will Anderson Jr. set the franchise record for sacks in his rookie season today with a couple more. So I think that gave him 7.5, but he set the franchise record for the Texans. So continuing to grow on both sides of the ball. Speaking of the Colts, we should get to the fact that my beloved Raiders were officially eliminated today in one of the a game that just sort of personified the season I've watched all year. There were some really good moments and some really bad moments. And, the Colts get a big win where they did just enough to get it done. I thought the Colts looked really good at times when it came to handling the Raiders defensive front, which has been so good of late. But this was just sort of an ugly football game between two teams that are mediocre. It's the best way I could say it.
It's one of those things where it is a big win for the Colts. I mean, they play the Texans next week, and what I haven't gone through all the clinching scenarios or whatever, but it does seem like a wild card play in. Like, I think whoever wins that's probably going to wild card. And this just kind of epitomized the Colts season. They're not a very good football team. Nothing comes easy for them. They've had a lot of injuries and things to get through, but they end up winning more often than not. They're 9-7. Like, it's been remarkable what Steichen has done with that team, because today it was a perfect example where you just, at the end of the game, I'm like, how did they really win that game? Like, they hit the big play to Alec Pierce, and Jonathan Taylor was okay, but the defense was fine. But it's just one of those things where the Colts just win games. They are very resilient. They're a very tough-minded team. And if they make the playoffs, they will have earned it, because they dealt with a lot of adversity this season. And to post a winning record, whether to get the playoffs or not, pretty impressive for the Colts.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Like, chunk plays are just where they lull you to sleep, and then all of a sudden it's a 70-yard pass. You're like, how did that happen? And unfortunately for my beloved Raiders, now nothing. They are officially eliminated. No playoffs. So we'll see what happens moving forward for Antonio Pierce as the head coach. Buffalo takes on New England. Speaking of ugly wins, here's the thing: like, New England sucks, right? We can agree with the fact that New England sucks, and Bailey Zappi is terrible, and yet I found myself late in the game thinking, man, are they going to win this thing? Like, right. It was pretty surprising to me that it went down to the wire like that.
This is the Bills. I mean, look, as much as I say, like, maybe they could beat the Ravens, they're going to go beat the Dolphins next week and take the division. Every week, it's like, why can't the Bills just make things easier for themselves sometimes? Like, that, yes, you're right. The Patriots were in this game at the end. They got the ball back, down 6 points in the fourth quarter, and it just, you got Bailey Zappi at quarterback. You got no talent on offense. You're not driving 96 yards or whatever they needed to do to get it done. But, I guess for the Bills, it's just a win. You got also the Dolphins loss you needed. It was fine. I mean, it's just, at one point, Josh Allen was like 2 of 11 to start the game. It was just ugly for the Bills, but they're in the exact spot you want to be in. I assume, I don't know if they've announced it as we're talking here, but I assume that's a Sunday night game next week. Buffalo at Miami for the AFC East title. And Buffalo fans just have to hope that you play down to the competition, but you're going to play up to the competition in that one and look like the best version of the Bills, because this certainly wasn't it today. This was an ugly, ugly win.
Yeah, another ugly, ugly win, because they didn't look great against the Chargers either, right? So, like, the Bills are winning football games, and they may end up, like we said earlier, with the 2 seed in this whole thing. And I'm not sure I feel all that confident with them in many ways, which is kind of amazing to say with Buffalo at this point. We'll see what that means. And yes, you're right. Buffalo, Miami for the entire division, likely going to be Sunday Night Football next week. New Orleans beats Tampa Bay 23-13. I don't know that I want to say the wheels have fallen off for the Bucs, but like, Tampa Bay was getting some real love, and they just weren't even in this football game. It surprised me a little bit to see New Orleans was in control the entire time.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I was one of these people really getting on the Buccaneers bandwagon. Like, this team could be dangerous in the first round of the playoffs, and Baker Mayfield's playing well, Mike Evans, all these guys. For them to just come out and get blasted. They were down 20-0 in the fourth quarter. Yeah. I mean, Baker
Mayfield. The score is not indicative on this one. Don't read the box score.
And don't look at Baker Mayfield's stat line because he was terrible through three quarters. And it was shocking because I thought we're over this. Like Baker, he's here and he's awesome. And to a Saints team that's been mediocre all season long, you just lay an egg like that. It's very kind of troubling for the Buccaneers this late in the season. I don't know. Maybe I give them a pass that they're like, we're going to win the NFC South anyway because all we got to do is beat the Panthers in Week 18. Maybe they overlooked the Saints. I don't know. But it was bad. I mean, this was bad and kind of a reminder, the Buccaneers really are kind of a mediocre team. I didn't see this coming. I can't lie to you.
Yeah, I think it makes things interesting because we just presume that Baker Mayfield's found this glorious future and he's going to be the quarterback of the Buccaneers moving forward. And then you see this, you're like, guys, the Buccaneers are actually kind of stuck in that spot many teams are stuck in that's not the best. It's sort of NFL purgatory. They're pretty good. Like, they're not great and they're not bad. They're just pretty good. And if you're just pretty good and you got a pretty good quarterback, it's not going to win you a lot of football games a lot of years, right? Like we can all agree on that. We can also agree, speaking of tough pickles, let's say a gherkin, just a little pickle. The Bears are in a bit of a gherkin right now. They win 37-17 in a game that looked amazing because it had the blustery snow coming down. And in a game where Justin Fields did Justin Fields things, ran around with the football, looked really athletic, he did all the things that we think Justin Fields could do. And I sat there the whole time thinking, okay, not only does this remind us that Atlanta needs to fire everybody, but the flip side of it is like Eberflus is not going anywhere. It's gotten too good for the Bears. Eberflus isn't going anywhere. And now, as we told you earlier, the Bears own the first pick in the NFL draft. I have no idea what the hell they should do with that pick. Because I hear everybody say reset, but man, I don't know.
There were Bears fans chanting, "We want Justin," and Jaquan Brisker, their really, really good young safety, another good draft pick they've made, was like, "We want Justin too. This is our guy. Like, we rally around him. He's who we want here." And you wonder, does that influence his decision at all? Like that the Bears locker room might like Justin Fields, want him back. I don't know, but it's getting to a point where you can make the argument. Look, I've been all about, no, you just draft the guy. You reset the rookie clock as far as a contract. You don't want to pay Justin Fields necessarily $50 million a year or whatever he's going to command. You just kind of reset that way. And Justin Fields is probably going to always be limited as a passer. Like, he's not a great passer. He's just not. Like, he's good, great runner, good player, makes plays, but he's never going to be a great passer. Maybe Caleb Williams is, maybe Drake May is. But then Fields has games like this, and they've looked really good. Like, this is one of the 12 best teams in the NFL over the last 2 months. Like, they are really playing well. Won 5 of 7. Eberflus somehow got himself off the hot seat. I did not think that was possible early in the year. I thought he was dead man walking, but he has saved his job. And you start to wonder, what if you keep Fields and you trade that first pick? You are going to get, if they do trade that pick, it will be the biggest trade in NFL history as far as draft picks for the number one pick. Whatever people gave up for Goff or Bryce Young or whatever, multiply that, because these guys, Williams and May, are on a different level than Bryce Young. Look what the Bears got for Bryce Young. They have to be sitting there saying, we could trade this. Look what we got last year. We got multiple first-round picks, second-round pick, DJ Moore. We could go to the Patriots and get a similar haul, or whoever you want, the Commanders, whatever it is. They have to be considering that because, again, if you just say, look, we could build around Justin Fields, we can make a really, really good team around him with the haul we'd get, I don't think that's crazy.
Whatever they do, I support, because I don't know what the right thing to do is anymore.
Actually, yeah.
Like, I understand if they want to run it back with Justin Fields and then get a king's ransom, because I think you're right. I think they could be talking about 3 first-rounders and a couple of second-rounders, get them at least to give them. So, like, they could be talking about years of picks. I understand that. If they decide that they want to take the quarterback and reset it, see what they can get for Justin Fields, I understand that too. Like, this is the one thing I am sure of. Justin Fields is going to start somewhere in the NFL next year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Justin Fields is going to be a starter next year. The question is it going to be there or is it going to be somewhere else? And when you start looking around at some of these teams that aren't picking in the top 3 that are going to be desperate for a quarterback, there's too many spots. Like, if you're the Giants and you don't love Daniel Jones anymore, are you going to make it aggressive? If you're the Raiders and you need a quarterback, you're going to make a move. If you're the Broncos, you need you have a year on him before you have to make any financial decisions. Like, there has to be a way. So he's going to start somewhere. I just have no idea what they should do with it anymore. Speaking of the Giants, they lost a heartbreaker today. And kudos to them for even being in a heartbreaker. They lose to the Rams 26-25. As a result, the Rams have clinched a wild card spot because Seattle lost. So, but this came down to Mason Crosby missing the 54-yarder after Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor played pretty well late in this game, really put the Giants in a situation where I thought they could win it. I thought this was sort of a heartbreaking moment for the team, but maybe best of both worlds. Like, you don't want to win games this late. You want to lose for draft status, whatever. But the Giants went out there and fought. They had some nice plays in this game. Kudos to the Rams getting the win, but I'm still surprised that the Giants didn't lay down.
Yeah, I actually was on the other side where I was like, going to this game, it gave me the spidey sense of this game ain't easy for the Rams. It is traveling cross country. It's the early start. The Giants haven't quit. They've been more competitive with Tyrod, and they really, really played well. And Tyrod did play exceptionally for a lot of this game and missed the one pass he needed. Saquon is out in the flat for the 2-point conversion late in the fourth quarter. And he just missed. You could tell he knew immediately. Saquon knew immediately. But yet they still have a chance at the end. And, they've had a ton of kicker injuries and issues there. Mason Crosby signed basically off of his couch after not playing in 11 months, misses a 54-yarder. What are you going to do? But yeah, I think there's a lot to be said, first of all, about the Giants and that they didn't roll over. I was questioning Brian Daboll midseason, like, where are you going with this season? Is this going to get away from you and you're losing every game by 30 points? And by the end of the year, we're wondering, do you come back? I think that was a real fear for the Giants, the way they played some of those games early in the season. They've played hard. They're not good. They've lost a lot, but they played hard. For the Rams, even though you're like, you're a 6-point favorites, you're supposed to blast the Giants. The Giants stink. You barely beat them. This to me was a good win for the Rams. This was another game that proves McVay's a good coach, and the Rams are going to be a really tough out in the playoffs because this was a tricky, tricky spot for them, and you still somehow came out with a win. I'm impressed with that, and I like that for the Rams too.
Yeah, big win for the Rams, and congratulations on making the playoffs for sure. The 49ers get back on track, 27-10. They beat Washington. I don't really know that there was a big take here other than Brock Purdy definitely came back and it was Brock. I mean, this was sort of who Brock Purdy has been. I think he sort of righted the ship quickly, if you will.
I think it's perfectly said. Any questions, confidence issues you had with Purdy? Is he going to get in a slump now? No, he made some excellent throws in this game. I thought he was really, really good. I think it's huge for the 49ers that the Eagles lost and they get the first seed because now you can rest Christian McCaffrey next week. He had, I think, a calf issue, minor, but you're not playing him week 18 with nothing on the line. Whereas if you need to win for the first seed, you still put him out there. I think they could kind of pick and choose what they want to do lineup-wise in the last week. You're not going to sit everybody because then it's 2 weeks off and all that. But I think that they could be smart about some of their decisions. So I think this was a big day for the 49ers. They're expected to win, but the Eagles loss really opens the door for you to rest guys, which is bad news for the rest of the NFC, man. I mean, again, no 49ers 2 home wins away. Purdy looks like he rebounded. Everything is on track for the 49ers. It was a good day for San Francisco.
It was also a good day for Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh beat the Seahawks 30-23. Yeah. Mason Rudolph was pretty good in this game. Like, that's all I can say is that Mason Rudolph was pretty good, but like, come on, like we made the Rudolph the red-nosed reindeer jokes last week, but I mean, I don't see how you would go back to Kenny Pickett at any point at this point. Like, I think Kenny Pickett's had his shot, but Mason looks like maybe he's capable.
Yeah, I didn't hear what Mike Tomlin said after the game about making Kenny Pickett inactive for this one, but it does seem like he was listed as questionable. He could have played, but the Steelers are like, nah, we're sticking with Mason. And I think that's the right move. I know you got to worry about, what's Pickett's confidence level going to be like? Who cares? This guy gives you the best chance to win right now. The one thing Mason Rudolph does that neither Trubisky or Pickett was doing, I'm going to push the ball downfield, and I'm going to let George Pickens make some plays. I mean, George Pickens has come alive the last 2 weeks.
And the catch between his legs that looked like he dropped it was...
Goodness. Oh, my goodness, he was good in this game. I got questions. Obviously, we talked about it last week and his professionalism and all that. But as a player, that dude is a beast. They're finally... Like, you look at that and you're like, why couldn't Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky take advantage of this? Or Mason Rudolph is just like, screw it, I'm throwing it downfield. We're going to let it rip. I think that's really good for the Steelers offense. Ran the ball excellently. Most yards, 145 rushing yards in the first half, most for them in a game since 2006. I mean, all of a sudden, this Steelers team we watched 2 weeks ago at Indy, I was like, this is done. This is, wow, they might even quit on Mike Tomlin. Do we got to talk about Mike Tomlin's job going forward? That team has looked completely different the last 2 weeks. They're still alive going into week 18. Tomlin keeps his streak of non-losing seasons alive. kudos to Pittsburgh, man. Kudos to Mike Tomlin for keeping this team, making the right move at quarterback, keeping this team on track, and still alive going into Week 18.
Can we also acknowledge through all of this that, to your point, not only does it keep that, always has a winning season streak, the stupidest stat in all the world, but importantly, you're right. Like a couple of weeks ago, everybody's asked me, "Oh, is Tomlin are they gonna fire Tom?" Like, I think the media had a different conversation than the inside of the building would ever have on Mike Tomlin. I've said that from the beginning. The Steelers have never been impatient as an organization, and if you're a team like the Steelers right now, you're looking around saying, "Okay, with the 18th pick in next year's draft, they may not be able to fix the quarterback situation, but they could go out and look for a guy like Justin Fields. Could go out and look for a guy like Russell Wilson. Like if there's been a guy that might be able to get the best out of a existing quarterback, maybe it's Tomlin." And all this conversation about Steeler football, it's amazing how wins just take care of.
Fitz, is there any chance that Mason Rudolph is just having this Geno Smith ironically enough that they beat Geno Smith, that maybe Mason Rudolph is somewhat the answer? I don't think so, but boy, he looks pretty good the last couple of weeks. I've ripped Mason Rudolph up and down, but I give him his credit now that looks pretty good.
He looks capable. I mean, he looks like if your best case scenario next year is you're bringing somebody in and you're going to let Mason push him, like that's not a great answer at quarterback, but there's worse. I keep telling everybody, I don't think this year there's going to be a quick fix for several of these quarterback issues. So like sometimes you just got to tread water. Mason Rudolph is he's a tread water quarterback to me. Like you can buy a little time with him while you figure it out, just like Geno's turned into. Like Geno's sort of a buy a little time with him while you figure it out. I don't think either quarterback in the Chargers Broncos game is going to end up being by a little time with, but the Broncos do get a win 16-9 over the Chargers. And, we get the Jarrett Stidham era underway for Denver. And I kept watching and thinking, I don't know. Did you see some? Denver's officially been eliminated from the playoffs. We all know that now. They're gone. They're done. But I didn't watch that and think, oh, now I see what they weren't getting out of the offense with Russ back there. Like it didn't even feel different to me.
No, and he was just the one play, little Jordan Humphrey basically takes a short pass to the house. That's the only play that was either side really made in this game. But here's the thing about the Broncos. You're going to have to eat $85 million in dead cap when you cut Russell Wilson. I think we all think that's coming, right? Like there's no way to fix this fence. I mean, this is just done. So you cut Russell and people are like, oh, you can spread it over 2 years. Okay, you're spreading $85 million over 2 years. That ain't much better. They're not going to have any options. Stidham's going to be their guy next year. He's under contract at cheap. It's almost like the Baker Mayfield situation where the Buccaneers are like, what do we do? Like Tom Brady's dead cap is taking up all of our cap space. Baker Mayfield's willing to play for cheap. Go for it. I mean, that's going to be I think the same deal with Stidham. Maybe they draft somebody, but they're not in a spot to get an elite guy. So I think that what we saw today out of Broncos, probably what we're going to see. Like maybe you could beat if you play Easton Stick, yeah, maybe you could beat him. But I mean, it's just the Broncos, and honestly, like the Broncos deserve this. I think that they handled this Russell Wilson situation so poorly. It was such bush league with the reports coming out that they went to him in October, basically extorted him and said, if you don't get rid of this clause in your contract, which by the way is negotiated in good faith, not like he tricked them. If you don't get rid of this clause in your contract, we're benching you for the rest of the season. And the union has to step in and be the adult and say, that ain't the way that this goes. Like that's not okay. And so Russell Wilson keeps starting. It's so bush league. It's such a bad look for a Broncos team that has not made the playoffs since 2015. They are not a relevant franchise anymore. They are basically, as I said on Twitter a couple days ago, they are the Mountain Time Zone Commanders. They're just an awful organization. They're a terrible franchise. Sean Payton is utterly unlikable. Like, it takes a lot to make Russell Wilson be the sympathetic figure, right? Like, not a lot of people love Russell Wilson, but he was done dirty here. And I think the Broncos are in for a couple more years of pain because this is not an easy situation for them to get out of. And please, if you saw anybody say with a straight face, this was just a football move, come on, get out of here with that. Get out of it. Don't be that gullible. This was just, they cut him off at the knees, and that's fine because everybody's like, oh, it happened to Derek Carr last year. Why weren't you complaining about this? It's like, okay, they didn't go to Derek Carr. The Raiders didn't go to Derek Carr last year in October and say, if you don't change your contract, we're benching you right away. Like, that's extortion, brother. Like, that ain't how the NFL works. That's not how professionalism works. And whatever the Broncos get going for it is what they get because they're just a bush league organization right now.
Which is, by the way, why several reports out today were talking about possible punishment from the NFL. The NFL has stepped in on this. So this isn't going anywhere. Like, this is not just something that's going to end. The Broncos are going to have to answer some serious questions for it. The other game from the day that this afternoon we thought would be a good one, it turned out to be a pretty good one. The Chiefs get a win over the Bengals 25-17. The Chiefs in that process lock up their 8th straight AFC West title. The Bengals get eliminated. I don't think there was much else we could expect from the Bengals, given the fact that, once you lose Joe Burrow, the presumption is. But I don't know, man. Like, I think the Browns have sort of changed that. We're judging everything on a bell curve this year. Like, the Browns made the playoff without their starting quarterback, right? Like, we've seen the Colts are in playoff contention without their starting quarterback. The Chiefs still don't look right, but they get the win 25-17 over the Bengals. There's something there.
Yeah, I will say real quick, because I wrote this on Thursday, that all this Jets stuff about what can we do? Aaron Rodgers out for the season. Well, Colts are doing okay without their starting quarterback, and the Bengals have been competitive without theirs. The Browns are going to the playoffs. You probably shouldn't be this bad as you are, New York Jets, but that's a different story for a different day. You're right about the Chiefs. As somebody who wrote this week for Power Rankings that, hey, let's not write off the Chiefs, because they're going to go into the playoffs with arguably the best coach and best quarterback in football. And that's a pretty good combination for the playoffs. I was sitting there watching this game today, when's it going to happen? When are we going to see Patrick Mahomes just rip off a 5-touchdown game? Is Harrison Butker kicking 6 field goals? Great for them to get the win, that they were in position 6 times to kick field goals. But they got 1 touchdown today against the Bengals at home. When is this going to flip where we're like, there's the Chiefs, there's Patrick Mahomes, there's this juggernaut? At some point, you just got to say it ain't going to happen. I don't know. I'm still not crossing them off, Fitz, because it's Mahomes, it's Reed, but this isn't the Chiefs. And I mean, MVS, drops a ridiculous pass today, a little bit behind him, but he dropped the whole crowd. I think the whole crowd was just like, this is it. We're letting this guy have it for all of our frustrations with this season. They boo him off the field. And it's like, that's kind of the Chiefs season where you just keep wanting more and it's just not coming. Yeah.
The funny thing is, if the playoffs started today, the first round game would be the disappointment bowl, because it would be the Bills and the Chiefs. 2 teams. Usually you get Bills Chiefs first round of the playoffs. You'd say, oh my God, this is destination television. Shut everything down. I can't wait to watch it. Instead, it's sort of a shell of the Bills taking on a shell of the Chiefs. Neither team has looked the way we expect them, but we both keep thinking that they're going to wake up. They're going to be fine. They're not. The Chiefs are broken this year. And I keep saying this over and over again, but New Year's resolutions has me thinking about it. When you're in your 20s, you can hop on a treadmill and you can lose weight like that. When you're in your 30s, you think about a diet, you lose a little weight. That's been the Chiefs for years, right? Go into these situations. They're like, we're fine. We got Mahomes, we got Andy Reid. We'll get on a treadmill. We'll lose the 10 pounds. What they're losing, right? Where they are now, it's like getting on a treadmill when you're in your 40s. Suddenly you're like, man, this is a lot more work. It's not coming off. I'm trying. I'm doing all the same things. It just isn't working. That's what Kansas City is dealing with right now. They're on the treadmill. They are doing the same things, and it is not getting the same result.
That's excellent, man. I don't know where you pulled that from, but that was phenomenal. And now I'm going to think about that. Every time I watch a Chiefs from now on, I'm going to be like, yeah, they're in minute 8 on a treadmill. Get me off this thing. No, don't want to do this no more. Sick of it.
Sunday night game gave us some drama, Frank, as the Packers get the win over the Vikings, which is important here because of the Seahawks loss. Follow me. I feel like Charlie Day and Always Sunny in Philadelphia, with the map trying to point to things. But here's what you need to know. Now that the Packers have beaten the Vikings, they control their own destiny. If they beat the Bears next weekend, they will be in the playoffs. And in fact, you get all the way up to the 6th seed. It gets complicated, but this is simple. Winning, they're in for the Packers, which is a little stunning compared to where we have felt the Packers have been at different times this season.
Absolutely. It would be a pretty remarkable accomplishment for them to make the playoffs. It says something about Matt LaFleur that kept this team together. I will say that I got to say this. What better way for the Bears to end their season than to go to Lambeau Field to beat the Packers and to knock them out of the playoffs? This is a Bears team playing really, really well. And it's like the Lions last year, right? We went into week 18. It's like, Lions got nothing to play for. They're just going to roll over. Packers are going to beat them. No, there's something to be said about, we're going to go to our rival's house. We're going to beat them, and they're going home. That's our Super Bowl. I think you're going to get a great effort. I think that's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a fantastic game for the Packers trying to win and get in. I'm looking forward to it. But just the Packers to get to this point after all the adversity they've had earlier in the season says something about them and where they're going in the future, really. The fact that they kept themselves alive this long, good on LaFleur, good on Jordan Love, is a big, big win for them today.
It feels like this is part of the evolution of the post Aaron Rodgers era of the Packers, right? Like, so everybody, even the organization, told us coming into the year that they expected it was going to take a little time and that there'd be a step back and all of these things. They told us that this is what they were planning for. So I think the fact that we're seeing this from them already shows that they're at least on schedule, if not ahead of schedule. And you're right, though. Like, what gets crazy about it is I'd love to just find a way to put the Packers in because that's a fun story. But man, back to what we talked about earlier with Justin Fields. If Justin Fields goes into Lambeau and destroys the Packers' playoff chances,
right,
that's only going to make it even tougher for Chicago to move on, right? Like, for the Bears, it's got to feel good. You'd be like, we shut down the Packers. But then you're going to look and you'd be like, I think that means Fields is going to be around for a minute.
I just think, again, going back to the Lions example from last year, not many people are paying that much attention to the Lions late in the year. Like, we knew they were hot, whatever. But they beat the Packers, and you're all of a sudden like, whoa, that was their record over the second half of the season. And we're going to do the same with the Bears if they win that game. I'm not saying the Bears are going to win the NFC North next year, but I'm not saying that either. Like, it would be a great way for them to go to the offseason, just like the Lions last year. I think you're going to get the best effort, obviously, out of the Packers, but best effort out of the Bears, too. A great rivalry game. I'm from Wisconsin. I lived that rivalry here for a really, really long time. It's awesome. And to have that on the line for the last game, I just think it's fantastic.
I'm going to start nicknaming it the Six Flags season for the NFL because it's been a roller coaster for the Packers, for everybody. But congratulations. Green Bay controls their own destiny. At least it'll give us even more drama next weekend. As always, we love getting to do this. We said it last week with Christmas. I'll say it again as we hit the new year. We're incredibly thankful for what this year has given the two of us and our friendship and getting to hang out with you guys. Charles McDonald back on Tuesday with Frank on the exempt list. I'll be back Wednesday with Charles Robinson, Jory Epstein for inside coverage. You can leave us a voicemail, speakpipe.com/0blitz. Follow us on social media. I'm at Jason Fitz Frank at Yahoo Schwab. Stone, our producer doing God's work behind the glass, at SJ Rochelle. Leave us that 5-star review, rate, subscribe. Tell your friends, your family, your enemies. Tell everybody. Hang out with us every single week. We will be back next Sunday. That's right. We're not going anywhere. We're still going to be back here next Sunday. We're going to be back to the playoffs. Hell, last I heard, they're going to let us hang out at the Super Bowl. So things are only going to get weirder for the rest of the year. We're not going anywhere. We'll see you next Sunday on what is going to be a stacked finale to the NFL regular season. And on behalf of everybody on the show, thanks for hanging out with us.